everyone, welcome back to another week. So this week's recipe we have two things to make. The first being our burger buns, and then the second thing is a tomato relish. In your packs you'll also get the burgers and some lettuce and tomatoes so that you can make a delicious burger for supper. So I'll just talk you through the ingredients for the burger buns. That's what we're going to start with. So the main ingredient, hopefully you should all know this by now, is some flour. We've got some strong white bread flour. We've got 15 grams of salted butter. We're going to put in 2 teaspoons of some caster sugar, 1 teaspoon of some dried yeast, half a teaspoon of some salt, and then we've got 100 mils of milk and 50 mils of water. And both of those need to be sort of tepid, so quite warm to the touch, but not too hot, otherwise the yeast won't like it. So I'm just going to get started with making the burger buns, and then later I'll show you how to do the tomato relish. So I'm just going to put in half a teaspoon of salt, and I'm also going to put in 1 teaspoon of dried yeast. And then we're going to just take the butter and we're going to break it into little pieces. And then we're going to do what we have done before, which is the rubbing in method. So we're just going to rub the butter into the flour until that's all gone. And what the butter does is it just gives it a softer crumb. So burger buns are often sort of quite lovely and light and fluffy and soft, and that's what we want. So the butter helps us get that texture. So you want to rub that really nicely in until all of the butter is gone. So once you've finished, just give your hands a bit of a clap over the bowl just to get rid of any of the extra. And then you're going to put in your 2 teaspoons of sugar and then mix that through. So everything is in there now. And then final clap, and then we're going to add in our liquids. So the best way to get your milk to a sort of tepid temperature is either to put it into a saucepan and let it just come up until that sort of lovely steam starts to rise. But it really wants to be just warm, not too hot. So both of these are at the right temperature now. So I'm just going to add the milk into the flour and then the water. And then either using your hand or a spoon, you're just going to give all of that a really good stir up and pop that to one side. And then we can do the sort of traditional kneading method. We really want to stretch the gluten and make it really lovely and silky. So what you'll notice is it feels quite sticky to begin with, but the more you work it and the quicker you do this, the easier and more silky and beautiful your dough will become. So this is also a good chance to practice our sort of slap and fold like this. So chuck it down on the table, fold it across. So I can already tell that it's getting more elastic. So it's not so sticky to the touch, it's coming together, it's got a bit more resistance, which means that elasticity is growing, which is brilliant. So we want to keep going on this for about 5 to 10 minutes. Until our dough is beautifully soft and silky. Once it's reached a certain point, you can then go back to doing the sort of traditional kneading method, where you sort of roll it on the table, because you've built up enough elasticity that it's not going to stick so much. So I'll just turn this into a little ball, just do a little test. So if you just prod it gently and it springs back on itself, that's a good indication that you've got enough elasticity built now and the gluten has been worked enough that you can stop kneading. If it just stays in one lump at the bottom, keep going for a little bit longer. But this is feeling lovely and smooth, almost sort of pillow-like, really lovely. So I've just put a little tiny spray of some neutral oil in the bowl. I'm going to just pop my dough in there and pop a tea towel over the top and leave it to one side. We're going to leave it for about 1 hour or until it's doubled in size. So whilst your burger bun dough is proving, we are going to make the tomato relish. So the ingredients for this are as follows. We've got a can of chopped tomatoes. We've got 100 mils of some red wine vinegar. 100 grams of some soft brown sugar. And then on this chopping board here, I've got a few things. I've got some sliced red onion, I've got some crushed garlic, and then these are sort of little baby cornichons or mini gherkins, and we're going to chop those up a little bit later. And then these are capers or caper berries, and then that's about a tablespoon of that. And then we've also got a red chilli, which is completely optional to put in, but is really nice if you like a little bit of heat. And I'll show you how to prepare that in a minute. So it's almost like making a little jam in a way. So you can store it in a jam jar and use it for another time as well if it makes too much for one serving. But it's really delicious and it adds that acidity that works really nicely in a burger. So kind of a replacement for a ketchup if you like ketchup in your burgers. So here you can see it a bit more close up. We've got the red onions, the cornichons or little gherkins, the garlic, the capers, and the red chilli. So the first thing that we're going to do is to cook off the onions and the garlic. Then we're going to add the tomatoes, the vinegar and the sugar, and we're going to let that boil down until it turns into sort of almost jam. And then finally we're going to add in the gherkins and the capers. So the onions and garlic are just very gently going to sort of sizzle away there. It's got that initial heat, and then we're going to drop the temperature down quite low and let that sort of soften and become lovely and sweet. So how do we prepare a chilli? I'm sure we've done this before, but just to remind you. So I've cut the chilli in half. So if you're going to use it, this is how I would like you to do it. So using a spoon, you're just going to scrape out the seeds from the middle. And you can use red or green chilies, it doesn't matter. And then once you've taken out all of the seeds, just leave those to one side. The main thing with working with chilies is that you're really careful about washing your hands after you touch them, so do give your hands a wash. So we're going to just take this into little strips along the chili, so they get about that sort of size, and you can do that with both halves. And then once you've got them all into matchsticks, then you can turn them into that sort of lovely fine dice. So I've just added the gherkins and the capers together, and then I'm just going to do a sort of rough chop so that they're just a little bit smaller. We don't want them too chunky, but just cut through a little bit until you get rid of any of the sort of bigger bits. And then just leave that to one side. So I've just added in the chili, and we're going to let that sort of sweat down for a little bit longer before we add the rest of the ingredients. So this is looking how I want it now. So we've got a nice bit of softness there, and everything's looking lovely. So into there, I'm just going to pop the whole can of tomatoes, all of the vinegar, and all of the sugar. And that's just going to cook away really nice and slowly until it really sort of reduces down and becomes almost jam-like in its consistency. Don't be put off by the vinegar, it will smell funny, but that all will cook out to just make it really delicious. So just have faith that over time it will just get less sort of vinegary, and will reduce down to a lovely, lovely jam. So this has been cooking for about 45 minutes to an hour. So it's really reduced down and become this sort of lovely jammy consistency. So that's what we're looking for. So I've just added in the gherkins and the capers, and I'm just going to mix that through. And then I'm just going to do a little bit of salt and pepper, and then I'm going to pop that in our jam jar, and that is our lovely tomato relish, ready for our burgers later. So that recipe made this 1 jar of tomato relish, and doesn't it look lovely in its jam jar? So you could give that as a present or something as well. Really nice to give away for Christmas. And it will keep in your fridge for probably up to a month, I reckon. But that will be absolutely delicious. So back to the burger buns. So these have had about an hour, hour and a quarter. And if you can see in there, it's risen and it's got a lovely sort of soft, pillowy look. And if I look underneath it, I can see lots of lovely air bubbles going on. So that's fantastic. So what we want to do now is just using a dough scraper or your hand, you just want to scoop out the dough and pop it onto your work surface. Once you've popped it on your work surface, you can just do a little tiny dusting of flour. And we don't want to sort of knock this out too much. We want to keep as much of that sort of air really as possible. We're going to split this dough, I think, into 6 pieces. So if I'm going to cut it down the middle in half, and then, so we've got our 2 pieces like that, and then each one of those into 3. So we've got 6 pieces, enough to make 6 burger buns. If you want them slightly bigger, maybe just do 4. It's up to you entirely. So I showed you this technique when we did the bread rolls video, but I'll just remind you how to do it. So we've got a piece of our dough. We're just going to sort of shape that roughly into a circle shape like this. We're going to pat it down. Then we're going to take our thumb and our first finger and we're going to pull and tuck it into the middle. So you've got a little loop like that. And then where that crease is, we're going to do exactly the same thing again. And we're going to go round and round and round, just pulling and stretching. You can feel how nice and sort of soft and elastic it is now. And you keep going round until you can't really do any more. It's got enough tension on it. And then once you've done that, it's going to look a bit like that on the bottom and that on the top, so quite nice and shiny. So we just created a nice skin. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip it over, and then you just want to spin it with your hands until you get a nice shape like that. And then on a clean area of your work surface where there's no flour, you can sort of roll it in your hand just to get a bit more shape to it. And that's going to give you a lovely finish. And then I'm just going to pop that dough like that onto a baking tray, just lined with a little bit of parchment paper.
And once I've got all of them on there, I'm going to do a little bit of egg wash on the top.
So I've got the pre-shaped rolls, so they're all looking lovely, and you can see they're just being put onto a piece of greaseproof paper just to protect your pan. And we're going to just egg wash these quickly. So just with a pastry brush or your fingers, just dab on some of the egg on top. This is going to give it a really lovely golden colour. And we're going to leave this for half an hour. And then we're going to do another egg wash, and then we're going to put some sesame seeds on the top, so they're going to look really brilliant. So once you've egg washed the rolls, you're just going to put a tea towel or some cling film over the top and just leave it to rise for about half an hour. So this has just had another coating of egg wash, and then I've sprinkled it with some sesame seeds, and then we're going to leave that for another half an hour to carry on proving, so they become really light and fluffy, and then we're going to bake them. So if you preheat your oven at this stage, we want to preheat it to 180 degrees. So the buns went into the oven for 13 minutes, but anything up to 15 minutes is great. When they come out, make sure you cool them before you eat them, and dig in and enjoy, and I hope you like them.